everyone, my name is Sadia and welcome to my very first vlog. So the topic of today's vlog will involve the autobiography Trevor Noah Born a Crime. As many of you already know, in this book, Trevor Noah focuses on his childhood experiences growing up in South Africa and the hardships he faced during and after apartheid. To be specific, I will be discussing how the conflicts within this text connect to both current and historical real-world events. A major conflict that occurs throughout the book is the one between the non-white citizens of South Africa and the apartheid system. I noticed how this conflict is reminiscent of the Israel-Palestine conflict that has been brought up in recent news. On page 23, Trevor Noah delves into the reason why the all-white government established apartheid. The ultimate goal of apartheid was to make South Africa a white country, with every black person stripped of his or her citizenship and relocated to live in the homelands, the Bantustans, semi-sovereign black territories. To understand the connection between this quote and the Israel-Palestine conflict, I will give you guys a brief summary of the Israel-Palestine conflict. So the nation-state of Israel and the indigenous population of Arab Palestinians are fighting over territory and have been unable to resolve the issue successfully for 100 years now. In the quote I mentioned above, Trevor Noah explains that the white population wanted to establish South Africa as a white nation. Similarly, the Jewish population of Palestine wanted to establish Palestine as an exclusive Jewish state. So let's go a little bit into the history. After World War I, Britain gained control of a piece of land called Palestine, which originally belonged to the Ottoman Empire. It was home to an Arab majority. However, between the 1920s and the 1940s, the Jewish population began to grow as many Jews who had fled Europe due to the Holocaust were looking for a new home. The thing is, many of these foreign Jews were more nationalistic than they were religious. They wanted to establish an exclusive state for themselves. So after British rule collapsed in 1948, synonymous to how the white minority took control over South Africa, the Jewish minority took control of Palestine, renaming it Israel. In reference to the quote again, Trevor Noah mentions that the white population of South Africa worked toward relocating the black majority into external territories. Similarly, the Jewish population worked toward evicting the Arab majority outside of Palestine into surrounding Arab countries. In 1948, the Jews in Palestine initiated a violent process known as the catastrophe, which entailed the forced expulsion of thousands of Palestinians from their homeland. Furthermore, for decades, Israel has pursued the policy of building Jewish settlements on land occupied by Palestinians. Essentially, similar to how the foreign white population sought to push the indigenous black population out of their own country, the foreign Jewish population has sought and is still seeking to push the indigenous Arab population out of their own country. Both the conflicts, the one between the non-white citizens of South Africa and the apartheid system, and the conflict between Israel and Palestine, are connected in the sense that they arose due to a foreign population colonizing land belonging to an indigenous population and oppressing the indigenous population in the process. In chapter 3, which is titled Trevor Prey, Trevor Noah talks about how he grew up in a world run by women. The apartheid had kept many men away from black townships for different reasons. Some men were sent to prison, some were sent to work in mines, and some were in exile, etc. Trevor expresses his admiration for the black women in Soweto, the township in which he grew up, as they managed to keep the community together even without men. And this was common in many black townships, like the women had formed a sisterhood and they managed to run it without needing men. However, on page 39, he includes a quote. As a nation, we recognize the power of women, but in the home, they were expected to submit and obey. This quote emphasizes the conflict between women and patriarchy, specifically how patriarchy conditions society to undermine women regardless of their capabilities. Even though the women had demonstrated that they were capable of doing things that were commonly associated with men, like keeping a community together and running stuff that was of the public sphere, they were still expected to go back into the private sphere. I noticed how this conflict was similar to the conflict many North American women faced as World War II came to an end. During World War II, many men were overseas fighting on the front lines. To compensate for the shortage of male workers, women were encouraged to participate in the workforce. Women worked in factories, producing munitions, ships, and airplanes. They worked as drivers of fire engines, trains, and trams. Some even worked in engineering. And at the time, many of these jobs were regarded as highly skilled and something that was reserved for men. However, these women proved that assumption wrong and demonstrated their capabilities to the nation. Sadly, after the war ended and the men returned, the women were once again expected to return to the private sphere of domestic duties. South African women in the book and North American women after World War II are connected in the sense that they were both at conflict with their patriarchal societies. Both demonstrated their competence in areas traditionally associated with men. Nonetheless, patriarchy had conditioned their societies into believing that women would always belong to the private sphere. Yeah, and that's all I have for my first vlog. Thank you so much for listening.